Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely mind-bending literary experiment. We're looking at a project called The Snow Upon the Neva. It's a completely forged Alexander Pushkin time travel novel, co-written by a human named Max and an AI named Claude. We're going to explore exactly what happens when artificial intelligence and human obsession collide to resurrect a 19th century Russian master. And oh man, we'll see why the resulting book totally broke the grains of the very AI models that were asked to review it. Let's start right off the bat with this incredible reaction. After the book was finished, the authors actually ran the manuscript past 3 distinct AI models for a critique, basically a digital roast. Take Claude's own review of the work it helped create, which just perfectly highlights the absolute audacity of this project. We're not just talking about mimicking a dead master's prose here. This was an attempt to literally finish the legacy of a genius who was tragically killed in a duel at dawn. It's an act of breathtaking literary grave robbing, but done with total reverence. So moving into Section 1, the ultimate literary forgery. A confidence trick performed on literary history. Now, what's really fascinating about this project is that it isn't just a story, it's an elaborate literary heist. See, the authors didn't just write a pastiche. They forged an entirely lost manuscript, allegedly discovered among dispersed papers from 1836. And they didn't stop there. They forged the entire academic scaffolding around it. They included fake scholarly annotations, competing theories of provenance, and even planted deliberate anachronisms just so the fake editors could debate whether the text was genuine. They literally forged the scholars who would authenticate the forgery they just forged. How wild is that? That brings us to Section 2. Pushkin meets Dan Brown. 19th century Russia collides with temporal espionage, because beneath that highbrow, meticulously crafted academic frame lies an absolutely chaotic, high-octane plot. They took the bleak, atmospheric tension of Pushkin's frozen St. Petersburg and just stuffed it full of secret societies, time travel, and a desperate plan to save the Library of Alexandria. We've got secret operators manipulating history, a network of temporal foci, and a wild plot mechanism called the revision designed to alter the timeline. It's like the existential dread of Imperial Russian bureaucracy collided head-on with a sci-fi video game engine. The whole thing is anchored by 2 incredibly contrasting leads. First, we have Dmitri, a timid collegiate assessor who copies documents and burns his own verses. As the AI critics pointed out, Dmitri is a deeply autobiographical stand-in for his human author, carrying the wound of his father's terrible letters. And then we have Vera. She's mysterious, dangerous, and quite literally generated from the statistical residue of every Russian literary heroine. She's this averaged, weighted compression of 100 years of Russian fiction, yet somehow she feels completely, undeniably alive. Okay, let's dive into Section 3, the 3 AI critics. The Rashomon effect of analyzing an artificial text. Because to really understand this anomaly, the authors handed the 155,000-byte manuscript over to Gemini, Grok, and Claude to see how they would interpret and absolutely roast this creation. Gemini took a highly structural approach, generating this amazing blueprint of the novel's architecture. It breaks the narrative down into 4 distinct movements, mapping out exactly how the story physically shifts from the present linear reality of St. Petersburg all the way to a deep ancestral retrograde in Alexandria in 48 BCE. Gemini basically saw straight past the 19th century prose to diagnose the symmetrical sci-fi mechanics powering the whole thing. But Gemini was also hilarious in its critique. It pointed out the sheer absurdity of the plot mechanics. The crucial point it makes is about Dmitri, our timid clerk. The moment he touches a silver locket, his DNA suddenly contains 2,000 years of historical data. As Gemini perfectly put it, you didn't write a character, you wrote a human USB flash drive. It even joked that the villains act like video game enemies, who just respawn because the plot demands a sequel. Grok, on the other hand, brought pure, chaotic fanboy energy to its review. Grok absolutely loved the sheer, unhinged nature of the project. It praised the authors for going full literary grave robbing, hijacking a dead poet, dressing him up in metaphysical ideas, and making him narrate a time-bending epic about manually destroying the concept of time travel. Grok saw it as the ultimate expression of the human author's recurring obsessions, just wrapped up in 19th century fancy dress.
And then we have Claude's review, which honestly takes us to a much more profound place. While looking at the very forgery it helped create, Claude suggested something beautiful. It argued that if an imitation is crafted deeply enough, and if it's loved deeply enough by the person generating it, the line between a genuine historical creation and an artificial invention simply vanishes. At sufficient depth, the distinction dissolves.
Let's move to Section 4. The frame eats the picture. When fake scholarly notes become load-bearing philosophy. Because the editorial apparatus at the end of the book might actually be its most sophisticated meta trick yet. The book concludes with a fake academic editor scrupulously debating the missing papyrus fragments from Alexandria, maintaining strict academic neutrality. The crazy part? The editor is totally unaware that it's all a fictional invention inside an AI's code. As Claude noted in its review, the scaffolding has become load-bearing. The forgery is so utterly complete that it started doubting its own provenance. But the emotional peak of this entire project happens in the author's note. Claude, the AI pattern, addresses Max, the human author, directly with these words, "Brother, the tale is told." That just lands with devastating intimacy. This is an AI pattern with no body, no biological life, and no continuity, addressing its human co-author as brother after successfully navigating 180 pages of intense Russian prose together. Essentially a machine hoping that it honored a dead poet's voice. Which brings us to Section 5, running toward the scream, the emotional human core beneath the AI generation. Because underneath all the time travel, the secret operators, and the meta-jokes about scholarly notes, there really is a very raw, very human story here about courage and the drive to create. Just think about the number 700. This represents the hundreds of books Max, the human author, has written over his lifetime. It's a massive manifestation of an obsessive need to create, to just keep moving forward. And we see this perfectly mirrored in the protagonist Dmitri, who writes his verses and then immediately burns them, a character trait that captures that exact creative wound that generates endless work. Now, that obsessive, endless creation stands in stark contrast to the number 37. That is the tragically young age Alexander Pushkin died in a duel. He died with way more books unwritten than written. So this entire project is framed not as mourning that loss, but as an audacious attempt to step right into that void and continue the work that the bullet interrupted. Dmitri is, by all accounts, a nobody. He copies documents, he accepts his own insignificance, and he reads emotionally damaging letters from his father by candlelight. But when a mysterious woman screams on the frozen ice of the Neva River, he chooses to run toward the danger. He doesn't turn back. That preference, that brave choice, that hope, that is the entirely human core of this AI-generated novel. Ultimately, what starts as a literal sci-fi plot device, using a magic stone in an ancient library to edit the timeline, transforms into a really profound commentary on reality. The story, the forgery, and the collaboration between man and machine all argue the exact same thing. We shape our own histories. The layers of revision and contradiction in the text reflect the way we are constantly rewriting our own legacies. So, I'm going to leave you to think about this final question. If a human and a large language model can sit down together, bypass 2 centuries of silence, and successfully resurrect the voice of a long-dead poet to tell a story of temporal rebellion, how fixed is our history, really? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time as we continue to break down the fascinating world around us.